The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall continue to follow me all the days of this protracted experience of death, and I will dwell in the house of the most super intelligent power, source, and force of love and creation forever. What's happening? Benton here. We're driving at an unusual hour. We've already been to sleep. More of a nap, really. I crashed out about 4 p.m. and woke up at 7:30, 7:45, something like that. About 3 hours sleep, I reckon. Hard to say. Certainly could have gone back to sleep. Chose not to. Part of that is I don't think we're going to make it to legal on the axle weights for this load. I think we're going to be heavy on the trailer no matter what happens. And, this is where long haul trucking can become interesting because it's the weekend. I prefer to drive at night. And there's only like 2 weigh stations. Well, there's one. So I'm driving overnight. So let's just call it Saturday, even though it's not going to be Saturday for like 2 more hours. I'm only going past one weigh station and it's almost guaranteed to be closed. But even if it isn't, I already saw on the map it's possible to drive around it, which is not legal, I don't believe. But I'm not sure that matters at this point. Although I might lose enough time. The Royal We attempting to cover 650 miles ish. And the main reason I've gone live so earlier than normal, is in about an hour and a half, there will be no signal. There will not be most likely will not be the opportunity to live stream. I started out about an hour south of Lubbock, Texas, and we're going out into the middle of nowhere on the Royal Way. From the middle of nowhere, even more into the middle of nowhere. Headed to Fargo, North Dakota, and the brokers, the crooked trucking game, they initially said I was going to someplace in South Dakota. And so what they do is they get the carrier, the company that I'm working with, they get the carrier to agree based on faulty information. And, that's where it stands. So I think it adds about 200 miles, I believe. Which, I'm on a day rate. I don't really give a fuck. But now another part of this is, if at all possible, I'm going to go to sleep earlier rather than later. And it took so long to get loaded, which is completely normal in trucking. And that's neither here nor there, but It's if I had left the place at 2 p.m. and went driving to the truck stop to weigh the load, all I'm ever going to find it's an hour. So 2 hours round trip to the nearest scales. So realistically, even if I drove an hour in the wrong direction to find out that the load ain't legal and can't be made legal, then I couldn't make it back to the place in time for them to pull any of the freight off the trailer. So that's null and void. And they had a new person. So the regular shipping guy, he left early for the weekend. And then this was literally the first load she had ever dealt with. So if I try to say to her, "Hey, we got to take some of this freight off before I leave here," everybody's trying to go home, and by the time she even figures out how to communicate all of that, by the time she figures out how to communicate all of that, go motherfucker. He's trying to call the injury lawyer. A lot of New Mexico plates out here. He was driving like he was trying to crash into me, like he spotted me and was like, "Let's go crash into that big rig." But either way, and again, since they said, "Hey, you can park here outside our gate," well, why would I go anywhere? And then meanwhile, the moment I leave there and hit the drive line, now it's 10 hours versus I can bank whatever time I've been there for my 10-hour break. And if I feel like leaving early, then I have the option of leaving early. So if I do wake up at 10:30 p.m. and I'm like, fuck it, I might as well drive. Well, so hopefully what I'm saying is making sense. So then when I woke up at 7:45, it was almost like a panic of, because the physiology, wants to go into a panic attack upon awakening for whatever reason. And I don't know if that's the case for everybody, but me being a morning person, it's not morning, it's nighttime, but if I've been to sleep, it's morning. That's the structure anyway. My schedule's flipped around so much. Well, we're entering into a space. Every vehicle's going to try to follow me now. We've entered that zone. They're all going to follow Benton, and I don't really have time to roll 60. But I rolled 60 to get here, I rolled 60 into 75 to get here because every car wanted to follow me. So bear with me. This is a stubborn one. It's a stubborn one right here. Socially engineering the general public. Imagine having Texas plates and driving that slow in a 75 zone. This is crazy. But yeah, back to so part of what happened, and add this to the 20,000 reasons why most people would not and could not do this job. And a part of this is on me, uh, because normally what happens is I get to the shipper and they want a pickup number, and I've got a screenshot with like 300 different numbers on it, and I'm exaggerating for effect, but it's unclear what the pickup number is. So then it's like, well, what does it start with? And so I'm playing that whole game, and the guy's like, well, it could be anything. And it's like, all right, well, I don't quite believe that, but whatever. And then I look at my sheet. There's no pickup information, because also the broker is intentionally withholding the pickup information on purpose. And so, not a big deal, but I'm already on the scale. Like, I'm next in line to get loaded. There's nobody at the dock. Meanwhile, the dispatch is already, rushing me up there early to try to get loaded early, and I got no pickup information. So fast forward 45 minutes, and I still haven't received it. And called the dispatch, and he's at a warehouse physically unloading a truck, which is highly unusual. But I mean, it says a little something about this guy's working on commission, and he's going to do everything he can to make his money, right? Even if he ends up having to unload a truck. And I don't give a fuck, because I really, in my mind, it's like, well, damn, unless they slam these peanuts in this trailer straight away, I'm not leaving here anyways. So fuck it. What do I care? I live in a truck. So two trucks come while I'm waiting, and now they're in the dock. It's first come, first served. And then I'll wander into the shipper office, and just to let them know what's going on. And the guy kind of scrunches his face, and he's like, well, we're trying to get shipping closed up by noon so we can leave, It's Friday, and these small town people, all they want to do is go home for the weekend, that's a lot of people, but they don't work on the weekends. This is family time. The actual, something akin to actual Americana. Oh, here come hey, what's up, Provo? Yeah, well, I forgot to turn it off, Provo, but good to see you, sir. But anyway, I can't read your chat right now, but I'll read it at some point in the future. Big fan of Provo's content. And what I'm learning about myself is that in becoming further sensitive to my own levels of undiagnosed fake autistic irritation and annoyance and frustration, that I'm better off just not exposing myself to a lot of things, because what bothers me a lot of times, it's really not, it's kind of neither here nor there, but then it's going to need to be expressed, if that makes sense. And I'm finding that expressing those things to those people, or while they're making their own content, is really not, it doesn't benefit anybody, generally speaking. So I do like to deliver compliments. And so I choose not to watch the content, because it's like, well, if we're talking about certain topics that I know I don't agree with, well, I don't necessarily want to agree. It's like, well, who cares about that? But then it's like, whatever I go through internally because of the way I process data at times. It's like, well, why even put myself through that? It's not going to help the other person. It's not going to help me in this moment. But I'm a big fan of certain folks' content. And then, when there's certain things going on in the news cycle, um, and then politically, the continued polarization politically, because at this point, all division, it's all wrong. I can have opinions about, I can critique certain things about certain types of folks, and certainly I have a lot of critiques, but there is a common, and it's not an enemy, right? There's a phenomenon that's conducting war upon the people, and that's not debatable in my view, and it's the so-called powers that be. And I understand that psychologically, and I know I'm being quite vague, and a lot of it's intentional, but psychologically, a lot of folks, and myself included in the past, would identify with some aspects of the, what I would call like the authoritative power structure. Humanity's psychological sort of the way in which humanity interfaces with authority dynamics, right? And then sort of an assumption or a presupposition that, well, there has to at least be a potential for valid authority in this world. And what I've come to understand is no such thing exists. There's no potential for a valid authority as far as at the level of mankind or humankind or this world or an earthly government, right? If we want to go biblical, it simply doesn't exist, has never existed, will never exist. So it's actually an error in my view, on my part, to engage in those dynamics. And if I do engage in those dynamics, it will be emotional, but then unfortunately I can be so skilled at argumentation and, reasoning and constructing various arguments that I can sort of make myself right, but I'm still wrong, because the wrong part is in understanding that there's no potential validity to the United States government. Has never ever wielded a valid authority, and it never will. And then because I was left my mother's matrix or womb in 1975 into this circus, because there seems to be consensus among the humans that were already here that, well, yes, what's occurring at the level of government, corporations, business, employment, and all of these various systems, that it does have validity simply based on the fact that it's all seems to be happening. It's like, well, actually, that's not logical. Any number of circuses, may or may not be underway. I don't know if that lends them any credence, or it doesn't add them any weight or substance, or to say, well, this is good or desirable or should be supported in some way, right? I mean, can anybody name a circus other than, Barnum and Bailey, right? Maybe some can, but so it's sort of a viewpoint of, well, this one thing is more valid than the other thing. So it's in some way, and I'm not putting this on, because I know many will say, what are you talking about? I'm not a Republican, meaning they're not a Republican. Well, that's not really the point. Is I think psychologically, almost everybody suffers from this at once. And I know I've said this before. Almost everybody suffers from, identifying, well, the Democrat Party certainly would have to be invalid and not capable of wielding power, well, then why is it allowed to have power then? See, but why? What's the reasoning for it having power? Because now the so-called other side is a failure. If a Democrat Party can have power, then the Republican Party is a failure because it proves itself to not be worthy. Because if it was worthy and the Democrat Party was unworthy, then the worthy party certainly and most assuredly in the long run would have to defeat the unworthy party, right? Otherwise, how can there be valid authority? Because if humanity is basically good, wouldn't that good have to win out in the long run? Wouldn't it have to win out in the long run in order for authority to be validated? So, but if authority can never be validated, now the cold, hard reality, the possibility, well, perhaps humanity is not inherently good. So, and to be able to prove this logically with one's own logical mind, now, yeah, in conjunction with intuition and epiphany and revelation and wisdom and all, yeah, sure, which I've contended is granted, not attained. It's bestowed, right? So it's not purely cold, hard, calculated logic. Because cold, hard, calculated logic in a vacuum would probably say, well, what's the difference, bozo? You're here. And no matter what, you're, at least some of the time, you're transacting in business. So you might as well feed your family properly, have them in a nice house, have them in decent clothing, drive them around in safe automobiles and raise them up in in an area away from the riffraff. And sure, yeah, of course. Who's arguing otherwise? Um, so, to bring it back to Benton, to remove myself as much as possible from energetically interfacing with all of that, right? And also entering into a phase of this, protracted experience of death. And again, you can call it life all you want. That's fine. You can also refer to the launching of the Space Shuttle Columbia in certain terms. But once we know that it exploded in midair, some of the terminology involved in the time period just before the launch and then right after the launch, well, once we're certain of the outcome, sort of that terminology and that viewpoint, it kind of becomes another thing, right? So, you can call it life. That doesn't mean it's not a protracted experience of death by definition. Like, now, if it's 100% known how the thing ends, within a reasonable boundaries, well, okay, call it life all you want. Meanwhile, in an inverted world, of course it's referred to as life. Meanwhile, it's at least as much so-called death as it is so-called life. It would at least be 50-50 at a minimum, right? And well, Jesus, if I could, in a thought experiment, risk being seen as speaking for Christ, but it's like, well, Christ might just say, well, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So, we could talk about death, but, have you talked to the criminal? The way, the truth, and the life is right here. Why you want to talk about, mundane topics? It's like, well, clearly the humanity has a fascination with such. Clearly. And I must live my principles. What I would hope for my fellow humans is that they would think for themselves. Well, I can't really be mad at the output of them thinking for themselves. But it's like, yeah, when I know what's going on in the news cycle, it's like, yeah, this, I'm just going to hear a bunch of things that are going to annoy me. And, why bother myself with that? For what? But yeah, Provo's that's a long way around to give Promo a compliment on his thumbnails. Thumbnail game on point. Like it. And, people can talk about this AI and all of this all they want, the aesthetics of this AI graphic design. And, I'm certainly no visual artist, but some of us do have a bit of an aesthetic, right? Some of us sort of have an eye for certain things aesthetically. And I would dare say Provo's one of those people. I'd like to put myself in that category at times. And so it's fun. And, probably revealing on some level something going on in the subconscious, something in the ether. Um, you know, and I think we're seeing more and more of the cyberpunk aspects of, especially a lot of the 90s media, movies in particular, but even something like Akira. And so you can also get into sort of a sci-fi and almost a fantasy, fiction crossover of a, kind of a merger of steampunk and cyberpunk and comic books. I remember a lot of comic book imagery and then even apocalyptic imagery of, me being raised up in the Jehovah's Witness religion that I, of course, never joined, but, and there's comments coming in. I'll just trust that it's not a demonic attacks, but and I don't mean from Provo, but and with my near photographic memory historically, very visual person, to remember a lot of these aesthetics and why hasn't a lot of that continued? And in some ways, I view the AI art as sort of an acknowledgement of like these dead end deaths of that progression of design. And I'm really only seeing those progressions visually, maybe in graffiti art, and then a few artists like a David Cho, who's somehow maintaining relevance in spite of his purported wealth, arguably. And certainly has achieved the level of, if he's the one who's actually creating that stuff, this so-called Facebook millionaire, David Cho, from Los Angeles, certainly has achieved the level of mastery many years ago over his craft. And so in some ways, I'm viewing the AI side of design as it's almost becoming degenerative in a way. And when I see YouTube content create, and I know, again, we don't mean Provo, when I see certain YouTube, and I've used AI thumbnails, I do want to put that out there. But a lot of what I'm seeing is derivative is kind of the sort of the trendy phrase, but it's not that. Almost like a decomposition. The old joke of Beethoven's whichever symphony, and it's like, oh, the punchline is something about I'm decomposing. It's like the numbers are going backwards or whatever. If anybody's ever heard that old joke. And again, this is what gets me out of bed in the mornings. Is just these are interesting things to think about. And so at this point, in order to keep getting out of bed, I'm going to have to avoid the annoying things and just only focus on sort of my own, apprehension of novelty. while continuing to level up. And wow, it's a badass neon Sonic drive-in sign that says "Live Free" and it's a cherry limeade. That's fucking badass. It's on a billboard. See, this is that, and that's actually proves the point design wise of what I'm on about. They went fucking analog with that. I wish I had some kind of way to show that to you folks. You know, with this increasingly, analog billboards that I see, or, LED digital. I've never noticed a billboard like that. That's fascinating. Huh. Very interesting. And what I've realized, and it's nothing against them, but everybody with children, especially minor children, they have to identify with the validity of the realm, even if that's not a thing. Like they don't have a choice. It's not up to them. They are prisoners and slaves to it. They can't. The degree to which they can psychologically separate themselves from identifying closely with the system, it's extremely limited. It's just in order for them to perform their function. It's they are victims of that in order to you know responsibly conduct what they're tasked with conducting, right? And so in order to in order to be able to use the bathroom, I must accept this. That's just what it is. So I'd like to move my bowels later on. I don't want to get too graphic, but we're getting into some of that mucoid plaque is being released. You love to see it. Let's get shed of that, buddy. Shed my skin, motherfucker, from the inside out. Best believe. Yeah, neon, and I mean actual motherfucking neon gas in a tube, motherfucker. That was awesome. You love to see it. And what is the being's attraction to that versus the potential repulsion of the, cyberpunk. Um, as cool as some of the cyberpunk shit looks, you know, you got to tell the AI to draw it. I haven't seen it choose a cyberpunk style. So, I've certainly gotten some cyberpunk style out of it by telling it to do certain things. Yeah, fascinating. Fascinating. Let's only use me Blade in the thumbnail. He's back on the scene. Um, IRL live streamer, probably the only one worth watching, other than maybe Andy Dick, hilariously. Oh man, what a mess! What a mess. But yeah, I've been thinking about maybe trying my hand at the oil field. We'll see. If I get enough money saved up, we'll see. course, I mean North Dakota, go big or go home. And man, I don't like the Permian out there in West Texas. Bunch of fucking assholes. I only ever picked up a load at one place in the Permian Basin, and total fucking dickheads. Like just on purpose, dickheads. Not the kind of folks I would choose to associate with. So anyway, back to picking up this load. Um, and I've reached a stage with this company where I can tell that they're going to try to keep me until I annoy them too much. And part of that is I'm going to bed. I'm going to bed in the afternoon, what they consider the afternoon and early evening, and that's just what it is. Deal with it. And I've got plenty of money, and I'll just fucking quit if they want to fight me on it. And I'll be flexible if it's an outlying, if it's an outlier of a situation and I need to stay up all night, I'll fucking stay up all night. Who cares? Put your big boy pants on and get her done. But yeah, waking up at that early of a time and then busting out the two phones and the technology of being able to sort of plan my route and look at where the way stations are and think about what time I'm likely to be passing through, and I'm like, they can always just open one willy nilly, surprise, right? But this app I pay for by the month, when the trucker goes past the way station, it asks them, is it open or closed? And it keeps up with that data over time. And so I have access to the historical data of when is this thing likely to be open and when is it likely to be closed. But I'm pretty sure I can just drive this motherfucker there, Am I missing my fucking exit? No, this is where the freeway ends for you, buddy, half a mile. Like, yeah, sure. That's what I mean. We're about to be out. We're about to lose signal. Might hold out for about 45 minutes or so, but we're going to start boarding out at some point. Going out into the rolling hills here. But I'm suiting me. And and I guess I left off from the story when I'd been made to sit around, and then I didn't care anyway, because the longer it takes to get loaded, it increases my check. Because it's going to look bad if I'm loaded by noon and I just stay there, right? I pretty much have to leave at that point, and I prefer not to. So I'm in no rush. But once the guy tells me, hey, we'd like to go home and we're actually waiting on you, potentially. Now, it turned out that a fourth truck came in and he ended up being the last truck. But, either way, I went ahead and gently broke my foot off in the dispatcher's ass. And he just, surprise, surprise, immediately sent me the pickup number. Funny how that worked. And now we've got MAGA in their pickup trucks again, preferentially following slow truck in the middle of the fucking night. Texting a side piece, fucking trying to avoid a DUI. This is who's going to save the country, right? I mean, these people are nuts, dude. I mean, they're just straight up crazy. He's on drugs. These people are on drugs, man. They're on fucking drugs. Like, for real. It's the only explanation. And that's a $100,000 diesel dually Ford pickup. That guy's driving around in a late model $100,000+ vehicle. And, you know, what is this? Right? He's just on his phone off in another world. And that's okay. And I accept this so that I can go number two, but I can't get, I can't observe what I observe every day. And then I don't see a path forward to these people are going to function in a proper society. It's like, no, you can't have a proper society with this level of dysfunction. It's dysfunction. It's not possible. This is not. This is so far below standard performatively. It's just there's that will not be. It just won't be reconciled. It's not possible. And you know, here's the thing: is that's the person that capitalism says gets to drive around in a what could be $125,000 pickup truck, and that same person in the 90s, the late 90s, early 2000s, when I worked for a Walmart vendor and we were partnered with Hewlett Packard, also a Walmart vendor. And so one of my cohort was liked cars, and he bought a used 5 Series BMW for like $25,000. And he was endlessly ribbed by these Walmart people for driving a luxury automobile and, you know, putting on airs. And they would do it right before they climbed into their $80,000 pickup truck that were, you know, no more than 2 years old. And now I'm going 55 miles an hour in a 65 because they're gluing themselves to my truck. It's like, what are you people doing? And see, this in Texas, this would have been impossible. I famously talked about flying down to Houston like a week after 9/11 and bought a 91 Eagle Talon all-wheel drive turbo 5-speed and drove it back to Arkansas. And in Arkansas, if you go 10 over, you pass everybody back then. And I got up to triple digits in the north side of Houston, and half the cars were passing me. Half. I'm not bullshitting. And to now, I'm in Texas, and it's 65, and I can't get these people up off. Not 75. I can't get these people up off of me. So if this was 2001, some of these motherfuckers would be going 100 out here. You know, society has changed, and it's, you know, this can't be undone. This is very, very bad, especially with, the idea that capitalism, at least in part, is supposedly based on productivity, you know. And again, it's all people with expensive late model vehicles. Like these people have money, man, or at least they've got access to a lot of consumer credit. Hard to tell in America anymore. And it's the same fucking thing. If I can buy and sell your ass, but I can only buy and sell your ass with credit, I mean, what's the fucking difference? I mean, that is liquid cash in a way, right? If I can get my hands on enough Federal Reserve notes to buy and sell your bitch ass, what's the fucking difference? And then at what point do I look down at my government mandated clock and say, well, I'm not even going to legally make it to this truck stop so that I can make it to this delivery on time, right? Within the legally allotted time, because I can't just hammer down and drive the whole way with like 3 or 4 vehicles surrounding me at fucking in the middle of the goddamn night. Like it just doesn't make any sense. And I'm telling you, if I could go 95, these people would be going 95. All it would take is one car to go 90, and then half the people on the road would start going. That's how impressionable and programmable these people are, man. And so I got a guy way up there, but he's pacing me from the front. So in a way, I'm driving his car because he's my speed is determining his speed. But then I bright lighted him, and he don't like that, so he might speed up enough to get away from me. And folks are like, well, what's the big deal? Well, I mean, I don't know. What is the big deal? You tell me. And I mean, this is your country. So that's the big deal is that the moment I hear anybody start talking about, well, what are we going to do? And, the loop into we level problem solving, it's like, well, why are you talking like there's a society or there's going to be a society? And by society, I mean something that, the majority of us could agree is would be representative or would represent proper society, within a certain within bounds, right? Within reason, with a margin, with a plus or minus margin of error, because the shit's gonna, even with the best of intentions, it's gonna go awry variously. Oh yeah, hit them brakes, buddy. Yeah, let's all hit the brakes on the highway. That's just a great fucking idea. Let's do that. That's the answer, man. Everything that happens, just slow the fuck down. That keeps everybody safe. Well, how come people still die in highway car crashes? Then I'd like to know if everybody hits the brakes every time something changes. Dude, yeah. He he just found, I feel bad for that guy. He made a right turn next to a gas station and he found a gigantic fucking pothole. Blam! You couldn't see it. Not that he was, it's dark and he wasn't looking for it, but it was full of water. That was unfortunate. I've been looking at cars again. I might have told y'all. I've seen some cheap stuff that if it, the problem with the cheap stuff is once you get down around 2 grand, at least half of that is just straight up scams where people are, they know that if there actually is a $2,000, 99 Honda Civic, it's going to, there will be people willing to send a deposit. Well, I ain't one of those people. And if it is legit, somebody's going to buy it so quick that it'll be gone by the time I can get there. Well, we still got a signal for now. Once we start going up and down them hills, though, I think it's going to be a wrap. Now I see a car up ahead waiting to pull out. This is one of them divided highways. Yeah, he waited on me. I'm going to roll 71 for a while to try to make up some of this. I can't even hardly see the lines on the road, man. I need to redraw these lines. You got these subtle curves out here in an otherwise straight road. And so if this thing does end up being overweight and, I could be over on the gross. They have their own scale and it's probably fairly accurate, but I think I'm only like 300 on their scale. I'm like 300 shy of the 80,000 gross and, hypothetically could be over. It's rare, but it happens. And, shockingly, it's not really in their best interest to provide me with axle weights, even though that their scale would have been capable of it. I guess I could have asked them. Maybe they would have. I don't know. And, gaslit by the, a presumption of cooperation and collaboration when, realistically, almost everybody's, suiting themselves, right? They're doing what's, most expedient for them in a lot of cases. And, if you look at the John Nash game theory, optimal mathematics, it, makes it to where I pretty much have to do the same thing, right? I think this is, in some ways, the story of Christ is to like really there's only one way to separate oneself from those dynamics. And I'll go ahead and like when I said earlier, talking about the corporations, the government, and all of these things have made an enemy of the people. There's only one move: is to not pay taxes. That's the only move. Anything else is just noise. And, as the royal we knows, these people aren't going to stop paying taxes. It's just not going to happen. Half of them wouldn't know how, even if they wanted to. Be like, well, how do we do that? We work on W-2s. It's like, well, you fucking quit and you find a 1099 if you can. Then you just don't pay the government. Again, I can't call for that legally, but the Lord Christ Jesus executed for sedition by the state of, and that's how we got to the title of the stream, executed for sedition by the state of, because that's what the text, the speech to text thought I was saying, apparently. Hey, look, another egg drink. Yay. I see. I was interesting at the start of the stream. I think we got up to 8 people and back down to 3, which is fine. But then I started saying true things about the realm, and they don't like that. A lot of them, because they can't. How could they like it, right? I mean, who wants to acknowledge that they don't love their children enough to do what is required to potentially provide their at least their children's children, with the opportunity to grow up in what could be somewhat akin to a proper society, right? Because this ain't it, and this has never been it. It's never going to be it. But and they're liars. To be a parent, an American parent, is to be a liar and to lie to one's children. Because who's gonna know these things I'm speaking on and tell their minor children, right? And what would the child choose later on to have? Would they just say, "Well, I would prefer to have been lied to about all of these things," or would I prefer to know the truth from day one? Because remember, as far as I can tell, everybody's subconscious perfectly decodes all symbols, which means on some level, those children know what this fucking place is and know what's going on here. And so consequently, they have to know on some level that their parents have sacrificed them to Moloch and Moloch's machines of industrial and post-industrial society, and that their parents are liars who lie to them every day. And their parents were sacrificed also, so they are victims perpetrating visiting the same victimization upon what they claim to love, and what many people will at least give lip service to and say, well, the children are our future, teach them well and let them lead the way. By what? Telling them a bunch of fucking lies, right? Is that leadership? And I don't believe in anti-natalism. I'm anti-natalism with obligatory lying. Right. And yeah, show me a human, I'll show you a hypocrite. You know, I lie my ass off when I need to. When I think I need to. Maybe that'll change. I don't know. We'll see. Now I'm body scanning because that little flash of anger, I think that was actual anger. That wasn't, you know, healed up energies waiting to escape. That was new shit right there. So do a little yoga, and I don't know. Actually, maybe it is. I'm getting down into that shoulder joint so far that I'm feeling some pain in there that I'm still uncovering new pain that was so deep seated that I couldn't even get close enough to it to even feel it. I can feel it. Boom, 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 boom. I can feel it. Boom, 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 boom. I can feel it. Yeah, man. What a mess. My breath work is on point, if I may brag about myself for a bit. Oh, yeah. Yeah, taxiety, Jake. That's right. Society. At some point, when does it become no longer an option to continue to support film? And, what I find most instructive about all this Epstein stuff, and remember, everything I've heard reported, and I'm intentionally not exposing myself to the reporting, but, it's not possible to completely avoid all of it. But every single thing I've heard, I literally heard about on the Alex Jones show over 10 years ago. But then the moment I say Alex Jones, now that we're into a person and a personality, and what does that represent? Like that's a government agent. That's an info slash disinfo agent. Alex Jones is not the answer. The point, what I'm saying is that none of this is new information. Meaning, I understand that the NPC normie baby truthers are just now finding out about it. A lot of them, but would it really have mattered that much if they knew about it prior? Because remember, their subconscious mind knows about it through symbolism, symbology. And you see these agents earning their keep. Joe Rogan, he's earning his keep right about now. We're starting to see what that Spotify contract was all about. He's earning that money right about now. Well, he's tap dancing, and Alex, of course, that's sort of that's a whole tour de force sort of performative catharsis, right? That what old Alex goes through, poor guy. A little bit of pure truth creeps out. And in one of those times he was on the Joe Rogan experience, because remember, Joe wouldn't have Alex on at all for a long time. And finally, he started going on there. And, uh, at one point, and Alex had been hinting around about this on his own show for quite some time. But, Joe kind of called him out a little bit for, choosing to engage in the 24-hour news cycle all day, every day. And he basically said, he more or less, without saying it directly, said that he was sick of it. And if it was up to him, that's not what he would be doing. And that, in fact, it's apparently not up to him. He doesn't have a choice. That's his job on some level. And it ain't up to him to, he doesn't necessarily get to determine when's his job over. So this idea that, well, the Rolling Stones, or Bob Dylan or whatever, or Madonna, they all got these, wealth and fame and all of this and entertainment, but sort of part of the bargain is, they kind of, in a ghoulish, ghastly fashion, have to sort of take it to the grave. And then you got, the ghosts of Keith Richards and Mick Jagger still performing, right? Among others, taking it to the grave. I mean, Mick, the casket will be on stage Mick will still be, he'll be going to perform right up until they put him in the casket, I think, at this point. I mean, is this, at a certain point, it's like, is this a Rolling Stones concert, or is this Snoop Dogg's MTV Music Awards performance of Murder Was the Case that they gave me, coming up out of the casket. And as far as truck driving, and Benton knowing just enough about business to sort of follow along some of these narratives in trucking, and then with my own study of Enron and the bailouts, and educating myself as a layperson on how the financial system operates. That was a lot of work. I'm certainly no expert, but I know a lot more about it than the average person, and provably, which isn't really saying a lot. I mean, let's be honest. But as more and more of these trucking companies go under and strand the drivers, and drivers don't get paid, and owner operators don't get paid, and um, it's a scummy, scammy industry, and they all are. All industries are, certainly. So this owner of this company, founder and owner of a was it AGX, I guess. Well, apparently one of a decent sized player R&R, which a lot of these, there's so many trucking companies. You know, one thing about trucking, people would like, a lot of times they say, well, who do you work for? And I'm like, man, there's a million trucking companies. Like, I'll tell you, but you haven't heard of them. You know, I hadn't heard of them before I started working there. You know, it's like there's just too many. You can't. There's too many to keep track of, unless it's JB Hunt or whoever. There's no chance you've heard of the company. Um, and a lot of what people are just now starting to figure out is that some of this, like this AGX going out of business. So I'm listening to for some reason, the founder and the CEO and all of this of the company, he probably because he wants to try to have I guess he's trying to salvage his reputation, because apparently his millions of dollars are owed because trucks and truckers and trucking companies hauled freight, right? So part of it's not just a trucking company that they do, it's a many fingers and many pies, right? They had their own brokerage. There's all sorts of businesses within trucking that I don't even, I'm not even aware of, because I don't find it particularly interesting personally. Uh, Beyond the parts of it that I do and that affects me, I find a lot of it just is of no interest whatsoever. And thereby, I know little to nothing about many of these aspects. But so, to realize that they had their own trucks and their own trailers and their own drivers, and some of those were owner operators and some were company drivers, and and on and on. Well, they still were moving a lot of money around that involved bills of lading, and you know some motor vehicle carrier somewhere sunk a bunch of money into hauling this freight, and it got delivered, except now they're probably never getting their money. And so that's where you get into the domino effects, and then that's where you get into what about insurance, cargo insurance, insurance claims. You get into uh, you know um, literal organized crime, um, where loads have been stolen, loads of electronics and this and that, systematically stolen by these fly by night companies, some of which, popped up just long enough to literally steal a bunch of freight and then disappear, as quickly as they came onto the scene. And so some of what this guy was describing and trying to, he's basically saying it's tied to his reputation, and he's doing everything possible to get these people paid, which the reality is he's not going to be able to get these. There's nothing. If he had access to be able to get these people paid, he could have stayed in business. Like the fact that he can't operate proves that it's like, buddy, you can't make them whole. So that's already been proven. I mean, but he's at least going to try to pretend like he can, and part of him probably thinks he can. That's something I've noticed with these business types, is they're almost serially incapable of. They can't lose hope. It's not in their DNA to lose hope. 46 and a 75 because these people are just determined to drive with me. They're just bound and determined on a deserted road. They're driving with Benton with 45 with the flashers on, and there they are. They're pacing me from the front. They just won't go. Now, do you think there's a possible world in which they get out here by themselves and there's no cars around and they go 46? Like, that's not possible. That's not within the realm of possibility. You know, at a certain point, I'm going to have to pull over. I'm going to start pulling over and waiting 5 minutes because I can't just drive 30 miles under the speed limit and get to where I need to get. It's just not possible. Now they finally gotten far enough away from me to that effect is broken. They're no longer close enough to me to gauge my speed well enough to try to adhere to my speed. So now although if I'm not careful, I'll catch up to them again. Oh, here's the rolling hills. So stream's over. I'll hang out just because I'm yapping, but we're going to be in and out. This is the beginning of the rolling hills, and it's going to begin a sequence. Most likely, it's going to begin a sequence of dropping connection repeatedly. Oh, yeah, flash of lightning, hit your brakes. I'm telling you, anything that happens, they hit their brakes. A literal flash of lightning caused them to hit. Just whatever happens, hit your brakes. That's the instinct of your average American now. Oh, something changed in the environment. Better press on the brake pedal. I don't like that. I don't like that. Put your foot on the fear pedal. Press the fear button with your foot. Rest area. Shit. Well, and see, that's the thing. Jake says bankruptcy was built into the system. Well, see, the concept of bankruptcy is an inversion. The system can't be anything. It is bankrupt. That's its nature. This realm is based on the lack of value, which is bankruptcy. It's the absence of value. So that's the trick is humanity, has been entrained and taught and trained to believe in the soundness of various systems that cannot, under any circumstances, hold value. Like the governments of man can't ever be uh, actual storehouses of value. That's literally impossible. So, in fact, man's financial systems, by definition, are never not bankrupt. They're always bankrupt. And that's sort of their secret, because that's what I mean when I say that the system, it's maintained within a state of collapse. It's never not collapsing. That's what it's doing. It's performing within that context always. And nothing can change that. Now, what the system does is it creates a psychology and has the psychology installed into the human in childhood. And so the child believes that, well, look, governments go bankrupt, companies go bankrupt. And that implies that there's a such thing as a, financially solid, stable, whole entity. There's not. That's not a thing. See, it's all varying degrees of bankruptcy, insolvency, right? And that's sort of the lesson of Enron. It's to embrace insolvency, to embrace bankruptcy, and to have insolvency manifest as a seemingly never-ending series of record profits. And so now when we see, with only a few minor exceptions, a never-ending series of corporate profits in many sectors, that's because Enron wasn't an anomaly, it was a test case. It's a prototype for a new type of business. And, probably supercomputing and all of this has enabled this to happen. But, the entire Dow Jones Industrial Average, they're all Enrons. It's nothing but Enrons. And so what you see in the California's bullet train to nowhere, that's an Enron, meaning people don't understand Enron, so they don't even know what I'm talking about. But Enron pioneered something called, and they didn't invent it, but they figured out how to begin using something called mark-to-market accounting in the industry, in the energy industry. And they also pioneered the trading of energy, and they invented the market for trading energy. And Jeff Skilling, a big brain from Harvard, was hired to do this, and he eventually became the CEO. And meanwhile, Ken Lay, who was CEO and chairman of the board, almost went to AT&T to become its CEO. That's how high level these people are, right? He was the personal guest of Herbert Walker and Barbara Bush when George W. was inaugurated president. It's this great honor to be invited to attend the inauguration with Herbert Walker and Barbara, because they can really only invite one couple. And they invited Ken Lay and Ken Lay's wife as their personal guests. And part of that was to thank, and some people don't realize that Herbert Walker, yeah, he's from Kennebunkport, Maine or whatever, but he spent a large portion of his life in Houston. And that's where, you get this idea that W is a Texan. Well, he's not, but he, was governor of Texas. Carpetbaggers, right? At least in the, the vernacular of the a war of northern aggression, right? And, something as simple as Bill Maher having a conversation with, and I forget who he was talking, it might have even been Adam Carolla, but, Maher is very astute with certain cultural dynamics, anthropology, and he knows a lot. He studied history. The guy knows he knows a fuck ton of history, even if he doesn't talk about it. And he just sort of made a throwaway reference to the War of Northern Aggression because, and especially remember, he toured the country as a comedian. So he's been to all these southern shitholes that he doesn't like. He doesn't like going to these places, but he went there. And so he knows the southern people, and he's talked to the people and had them, refer to him as a Yankee and talk about the War of Northern Aggression. And he mentioned it maybe to Corolla, who's like, really? They do? Like, yeah, that's what they call it. And hell, there was even people in the YouTube comments were like, I had no idea. And I'm like, yeah, man, I'm from Arkansas. I can assure you, my fucking boomer dad, I heard him say that. He said that to me like the other day, the War of Northern Aggression. Some of these fools are still talking about Lincoln, like basically blaming everything on Abraham Lincoln. That's how far back this hatred of the Democrats goes. People would realize that. Well, it's raining now. Yeah, signal's getting weak, but we're still here apparently. And I shouldn't have started talking about Bill Maher, but I got lost in my own sauce there. But let's see, how did I get to War of North? Oh, Enron. Yeah, let's go back to Enron. So this mark-to-market accounting, what that means is when Enron signed a deal with the government of India and said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to come build a power plant. Oh, and real quick, part of Ken Lay and his wife being invited to attend the inauguration, with this great honor with Herbert Walker Bush and Barbara, was to be personally thanked for all the good that they had done for the energy business in Houston. Because Houston, apparently it's in a big slump now economically, but that's been a big money, like low key, a big money city for decades. A lot of people went to Houston and made a lot of money, man. And a lot of that money was made in energy services and all of these things, and not just oil, but electricity and a lot of things. And so Enron would sign a deal. So here's how they had this. And remember, Enron was the number one stock on Wall Street for like 9 years in a row, voted on by traders. Number one. And for at least the last 2 of those years was fiscally insolvent on paper. Bankrupt on paper for at least the last 2 years. And now here's where it becomes surreal. Enron went out of business because a really smart lady journalist looked into their books and came to the conclusion that they were broke and wrote a series of articles. And more than that, basically more or less caused the stock to go damn near zero in a short period of time. Right. So they sign a 10-year agreement with India that for like energy services. Now, part of that is they lock in India. They say, so the benefit to the government of India is they get a modern power plant that their country needs, number one. Number two, they want to, because of the volatility in energy markets, They want to lock in what they view as a low price if possible. And then Enron and pioneering these various markets, well, they're an inside player, right? So now it's like, hey, can Harvard big brain Jeffrey Skilling, it's all up to him to get in there with the John Nash game theory, optimal mathematics, and the computer systems and all of this to make all of this happen, right? And to make a profit, to justify the what ultimately is investor capital. It is a Ponzi in a way because it becomes dependent upon you need people willing to continue to prop up the stock price by buying the fucking stock. So much so, and I won't even get into what happened with Pacific Gas and Electric. I mean, maybe we will, but there was a whole, well, maybe I'll remember. I can't even open that can of worms right now. And see, we can already see that this quickly becomes so complicated. Your average person just has no, it's effectively impossible for your average person to even have a notion of how fucking nightmarish this is. And this is merely one aspect of, this is very limited in scope, what I'm even talking about here compared to the greater so-called economy. It's really shenanigans. It's absurd on its face. So on the books, when Enron signs this deal that includes building a power plant, and it's going to be rolled out in phases, and then so it's like, okay, first phase provides however many kilowatt hours and megawatts or whatever the fuck it is, and then the second, but contractually they'll only activate the second stage under certain conditions have to be met by the Indian government and all of these things. And it's also, politically, the Indian politicians get to claim a great victory because the country's in such a state that, much of the country doesn't necessarily have access to full-time proper electricity, right? It's a capacity issue. And with locking in of the price for 10 years and all of these things. So the effect is Enron, through mark-to-market accounting, what they did was they projected out 10 years in the future what they suspect their profit's going to be. And they claim that profit on their books day one. Now, what this means is ultimately they didn't even build the motherfucking power plant. They only ever completed like the first phase. But their stock reacted based on the full fucking seeing the deal through to completion. And they did versions of that over and over and over again. And that ain't the half of what they done. They did way more. They did way worse than that. And really, the only compromise that the government. So early on in Enron's history of which their modern history anyway, when they were became what they became, they had to convince the government to allow them to use mark-to-market accounting. And really, the only caveat, the government said, well, if you go to market, you have to stay on it. You can't switch back and forth, meaning it's all mark to market all the time, or it's nothing. We were not. It's all you're going to use. You're not going to pick and choose to suit your own purposes, right? And then even if it was potentially valid, so now humanity's trustworthy to just accurately predict how much profit they're going to make over 10 years of a deal. And at a certain point, Enron executives are flying out to India and trying to meet with the government of India or whatever. And they're being assured that, well, and the way culturally, apparently it works in India is, well, the Indian government has agreed to do these things. So even if it's, for example, not making its payments at a certain point, it's like, well, Enron's, Indian liaison is all he's going to do is say he's just going to be confused as to why Enron wants to be paid in the first place, because his attitude is, well, I mean, the government's going to make good on it. After all, they promised to. I mean, that's like apparently the culture, which of course that's a scam, right? That's a scam. And the reason why they had to fly to India to try to get paid was they were going into a liquidity crisis while simultaneously having record earnings quarter after quarter after quarter. So this is where these trucking companies are getting to, is that, on paper, they're able to show certain metrics, such as they're having the highest level of credit ratings with whoever they do business with, because a lot of the trucking is predicated on credit and ability to, well, it's like if you can't if the trucking company can't have cash to pay everybody they owe money to, do they have access to liquidity in borrowing to pay the money? See? And so that's where I'm seeing a lot of parallels to Enron, because in listening to this founder and CEO of this trucking company that went out of business, he doesn't even seem to fully understand. You can tell he's been run over. He's got run the fuck over in the last 2 weeks, and I don't think he did not get the license plate of the truck that hit him. I mean, he still, you can tell he doesn't even really know what happened to him. Now, again, I don't understand it well enough to really explain it, but apparently they entered into some sort of strange financing agreement with this R&R carriers that they're not otherwise involved with these people. Like, they do business. They're kind of business partners. And I think what happened is during the pandemic. So what happened during the pandemic in trucking is the rates went so sky high that the reaction was, and money was free. So there was so much access to credit. There was so much free, cheap money available that a lot of these companies, they built their capacity up, meaning trucks and trailers. They went out and bought new equipment. They overpaid for used equipment. They went fucking hog wild and capacity, and they made a shitload of money in the short run. And then they went in, the entire industry went into like a 4-year freight recession with the rates, which continues on, and it's never gonna end, folks. And it's gotten less bad lately, but it's simply never going to end, because it can't end. And it's further consolidation. What's going to happen is just The small and medium sized carriers are they're exiting the industry. It's just they're always exiting the industry. They're permanently exiting the industry, and that will never be accepted by truck drivers and small carriers until they. And again, a lot of these business people, these entrepreneurs, they can't lose hope. They will continue to operate until the wheels fall off, like literally. They won't stop until they're forced out. Well, they're in. This is the process of forcing them out, and they won't be able to buy back in. This guy's not coming back from this, right? He said he's 59. If he's willing to, he's going to have to go get in a truck, and I'm not even kidding. That's his only way back is he's going to have to go get in a fucking truck, and I'm not joking. And he's probably going to try to get something going, and what he's going to find is, oh, I can't even. He's not even going to be able to get enough money to do anything other than, it's going to be the full faith and credit of his butt in a seat somewhere. That's it. And, famously coming out of the Depression, you had these bankers and other, people in finance. Some of them were so disgraced that in one case you had a guy who sort of it's probably apocryphal, but I remember reading stories of coming out of the Depression, one of these guys who was debanked to where for the rest of his life, he had to go out and get money orders and to pay his personal bills. This motherfucker couldn't get a checking account, right? It was sort of the humiliation of he had to go down and put a fucking money order in an envelope and lick a stamp to pay his fucking personal bills. So what do you think he was allowed to do in business? Like, hey, motherfucker, sweat of your brow, goddammit. You want to go start your own small business? Hey, here's a hot dog cart. Have at it, buddy. Hey, man, here's a truck. This guy probably owns a truck somewhere. Hey, buddy, put your butt in the seat. But you think, do you have enough cash you think you're going to put a driver in a truck? Do you have the cash to fill the tank up? Do you have the cash can you front the money to pay the insurance? Because remember, this guy was doing everything on liquidity. So he got into a deal with this R&R to access, what it turned out was he had access to $1.3 million of revolving credit. And so the guy who's interviewing him owns a trucking company and is a fleet manager and has a trucking, a channel called ET Transport. And I watch some of their content. And so he's basically like, well, okay, what was the purpose of this? Why did you even have? And so what ultimately happened was, whether knowingly or unknowingly, this guy attached his life's work to some version of an Enron, and through banks as lien holders, because of the liens on R&R, the banks at any time could call their liens in. And those liens got attached to this revolving credit. And so what happened was that if R&R went down, that then pulled RBX down with it, or AGX or whatever. I don't remember what it was called. It might have been AGX. That then pulls AGX in, and now the banks have AGX by the balls to where the banks will pretend like there's a lifeline, and they'll let AGX operate long enough. And then once the banks see, well, there's nothing we can loot, there's nothing we want. Now, if there was some desirable aspects of AGX's business, and they could say, okay, well, give us your whatever division, and we'll, call the dogs off long enough for you to maybe survive this phase if everything breaks in your favor, right? So you're saying there's a chance. And so basically this guy said, well, we had like what turned out to be a 3-day window. And finally the banks just said, no, man, it's a no-go. And really what the banks are saying is, you got to find somebody. You got to find somebody to make us whole. And they got to sign off on that. And our lawyers got to read the contracts and go through them with a fine tooth comb. And that's going to take 3 days. We need a 3-day window so our big brain J lawyers can go through everything to make sure that somebody's not fucking putting a backdoor loophole in there somewhere. And they got to put their fucking John Hancock on it. They got to stay. They got to, they're staking their the length of their hook nose reputation on it, right? Their Texas handshake, strong as oak, right? And so now you got bozo white guy going under because he didn't even understand the forces that he was. And it's all greed. It's all, oh, look, it's a pandemic and let's go out here and screw everybody over. And let's go out here and fuck everybody we can fuck and make as much money as possible. And yeah, that's great. And this guy still views himself, you can hear in his discourse, he still views himself as a successful business person. It's like, well, if by success you mean you ran your goddamn Titanic into the iceberg, then yeah, okay. Well, good job, buddy. Mission accomplished. Shout out to George W. Bush's codpiece. I mean, attaboy, right? He's probably not lost his retirement. So then it's Ken Lay from Enron. So let's go to the Pacific Gas and Electric side of things. At a certain point, Enron got so big that they started acquiring whatever they could acquire, and they more or less wrote a check and bought PG&E, which was, they provide utilities for like California, Oregon, and I think maybe into Washington, and not everywhere, but a lot of places. And so you had all these people who worked their whole lives for PG&E and had stable employment and had a living wage and had health insurance and had a retirement. And when Enron bought them out, Enron was the darling stock of Wall Street. So the majority of their retirement got converted and I don't remember the particulars, but the workers would have more or less been treated like they were, any hesitancy or doubt would have been treated like you don't know how good you got it, and this is the opportunity of a lifetime. You're going to have all this wealth, and you're very fortunate. And so what ended up happening was that they had their, in the long run, they wiped out their retirement. So what happened was that it got so bad, you had a window of time where legally there was a time of the way, because there ended up being an attempted merger. And again, I'm going to have some of these details wrong. This is close enough. Because Enron tried to save itself by merging with Dynegy, which was the next largest in the industry is basically Enron's. It was Burger King to Enron's McDonald's. And they were, had the same business model in a lot of ways. Sort of a less sophisticated, less successful version of Enron. And, they coveted a lot of Enron's success, and they wanted to be like Enron. And so in attempting to facilitate this merger, and a lot of which involves stock prices and stocks and, all of these things and dividends and what do the shareholders get out of the deal. And, it's got to be to their advantage. And, Dynegy's board has a sign off on it. Enron's board has a sign off on it. All the lawyers on both sides have to sign off on it. It's a big fucking mess. And so as part of all of this, at a certain point, this PG PG&E employees will be able to cash out their stock at a certain price. Like legally, this has to happen. And so there was a period of time when Ken Lay was large portions of his own stock and other selling their Enron stock, while at the same time PG&E people put saying on their employees saying, look, y'all would be insane to do anything but to keep this in Enron stock. And most of them chose to keep it in Enron stock, which then became damn near worthless at a certain point. Oh, you thought you had a retirement worth $10 million. Well, now it's basically worthless. And that happened to probably tens of thousands of people. And so, again, it's all of these scummy things. Why am I stuttering? The scummy things happen in all of these industries, and it's always the taxpayer and the common worker and the little guy that takes the biggest screwing, right? And so now, because of social media and because of the awareness of trucking, when these companies get all these truckers home, meanwhile, a lot of truckers especially ones who've been in trucking for 30 years, well, they've probably personally been through this at some point. And you got now people start posting in the comments, well, one of them's like, hey, I keep $1,000. I keep $1,000 on me no matter what, because if the fuel card gets turned off, I got to be able to get home, right? And one guy, and then people start describing their various strategies. Well, you can drive the truck to a car rental place and then rent a car and get home, and which in my mind that's so expensive with between gas and what the car costs. You might as well just drive the fucking rig home. But not sabotaging the truck tank, but it's like I'm just like, what's the point? How does that? And they're saying that as if that'll hurt the company. It's like, well, if they're shutting down, how does that hurt? It doesn't hurt the company if they're actually closing their doors. Now, I guess some people have realized that some of these companies are so fly by night that they will just go ahead and uh, put new DOT numbers on that equipment and keep operating. But then if they're going to keep using that truck, they're probably going to get the driver home so that they can keep using it. If they don't get the driver home in the truck, how are they going to keep? It's going to cost more to go find the truck. And then now somebody's taking, truck, and then they put sugar in the gas tank. Like these things happen way more than realize otherwise. It's not that out of bounds for these things. Oh man, I think it's time for coffee. What do y'all think? Shout out to Starbucks Nitro Cold Brew in a can. Don't mind if I do. I wish I'd bought some of that Stumptown when I was at Whole Foods. Mm. But anyway, I guess that's enough about Enron. But the trucking side of it is fascinating to me because so what the interviewer was able to get out of this failed trucking company owner is that company owner had the opportunity to decouple from this RBX or RNR or whatever it was. But see, he's addicted to that 1.3 million. See, he wants to be able to continue to use that 1.3 million, and see, his ego probably gets tied into where, yeah, that sounds like a lot of money until you realize a fucking truck and trailer's damn near $300,000, right? If you're paying cash now, how much does 1.3 million in revolving liquidity? Well, when you add that to other lines of credit, that it can be leveraged to where he can probably get $13 million worth of equipment. He can probably 10x his 1.3, right? to fight this battle, so we're out of here. Peace. Or is it war? I forget.